2 days before he died, Professor Samuel Noah Kramer called his research assistant. His voice on the phone, thin, strained. The man who'd spent 50 years decoding Sumerian tablets wanted to talk about one he'd never published. One he photographed in 1956 and buried in his files. "I should have translated it," he whispered, "but I was afraid of what it meant." The tablet was numbered N by 12,501. Clay pressed into wedge shapes 4,400 years ago in the ancient city of Nippur. Kramer took one photo, mentioned it briefly in a book, then never spoke of it again. He died before explaining why. But in August 2024, something changed. Professor Andrew George and researcher Junko Taniguchi sat in a basement room at the University of London, surrounded by 4 different tablets, ones the British Museum had owned since 1892, yet clay covered in predictions, warnings carved by Babylonian astronomers between 1894 and 1595 BCE. They'd just finished the translation, and the predictions were coming true. The air in that basement room must have felt different once they understood what they were reading. Cold, maybe. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. The kind you feel in your chest when you realize you've uncovered something that was meant to stay buried. A king will die, destruction of Elam. That's what the first tablet said. Not a metaphor, not a prayer, a prediction. If an eclipse becomes obscured from its center all at once and clear all at once, then a king dies. An empire falls. The tablet specified which empire: Elam, an ancient region in what's now Iran. And another tablet warned about downfall of Subartu and Akkad if an eclipse begins in the south and then clears. Wait. These weren't vague prophecies scrawled by mystics having visions. The Babylonians built an entire system, organizing eclipse omens by time of night, shadow movement, duration, exact date in their lunar calendar. Bradley Schaefer, an astronomer at Louisiana State University, described what ancient farmers would have experienced. You're out there, and all of a sudden, the sky goes dark. It can only be a message from the gods. But here's what nobody talks about. The messages worked. Kings did die. The empires mentioned, Elam, Subartu, Akkad, they collapsed exactly as predicted. All of them. Political assassinations timed to celestial events? Self-fulfilling prophecies weaponized by priests? Or did these ancient astronomers see patterns in the cosmos that we've forgotten how to recognize? The British Museum acquired those 4 tablets between 1892 and 1914. That's 110 years. More than a century of sitting in climate-controlled storage, cataloged, photographed, partially translated by specialists who couldn't quite crack the full meaning. Nobody finished the job. Why not? George and Taniguchi's paper, published in the Journal of Cuneiform Studies, describes these artifacts as the oldest examples of compendia of lunar eclipse omens yet discovered. The oldest. In 4,000 years of human civilization recording information on clay, stone, papyrus, paper, these 4 tablets represent the first systematic attempt to predict the future using astronomy. They sat untranslated for 110 years. Behind the scenes, other tablets were being ignored too. In 2025, Dr. Jana Matuzak at the University of Chicago finally analyzed that tablet Kramer had photographed in 1956, NY 12501, the one he called about before he died. It contains a myth about the storm god Ishkur being captured in the netherworld, dragged underground with his cattle. While Ishkur's trapped below, children are born and immediately die. Crops fail. Drought spreads, starvation. a storm god imprisoned underground. Rain stops falling. Notice the pattern? April 8th, 2024. A total solar eclipse crossed North America, Mexico through Texas, up through Canada. Millions watched. Schools closed. Social media exploded with photos. NASA called it the eclipse of a generation. 4 months later, George and Taniguchi published their translation. The ancient Babylonians predicted eclipses using something they discovered through centuries of observation: the Saros cycle, an 18-year pattern of lunar eclipses that repeats with mechanical precision. They knew exactly when eclipses would occur, and they tied each one to specific disasters. The tablets list what happens during eclipse windows. There will be an attack on the land by a locust swarm. A large army will fall. Pestilence, dearth of straw, losses of cattle. So let's talk about what's happened in the last 5 years. 2020 through 2024, global pandemic, unprecedented locust swarms across East Africa and the Middle East. The worst in decades. Cattle losses in North America, reaching crisis levels from drought and disease. Political instability, leadership transitions, conflicts erupting in regions that map almost perfectly onto ancient Mesopotamian territories. Still think it's coincidence? The tablets aren't finished talking. Go to the British Museum's online collection right now. Search their Cuneiform tablets. You'll find thousands. Clay records from Mesopotamia, spanning millennia. The 4 eclipse tablets George and Taniguchi translated are photographed there. Documented. You can see them yourself. Or check the Journal of Cuneiform Studies, published by the University of Chicago Press. The translation is published. The predictions are written in wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay 4,000 years ago. Here's what the Babylonians understood that we've forgotten. Observation compounds over time. The origins of some of the omens may have lain in actual experience. Observation of portent followed by catastrophe, George told Live Science. They watched the sky, documented what happened, cross-referenced celestial events with political upheavals, natural disasters, epidemics, famines. Century after century, generation after generation. They built a database, and according to their records, the patterns held. One tablet even says, "This eclipse is set aside for testing," meaning when particularly dire omens appeared, the king's advisors would perform additional verification by inspecting animal entrails, double-checking their astronomical predictions with biological divination. They were confirming their data. Listen. The Babylonians didn't just predict that eclipses would happen, they predicted exactly when. The Saros cycle they discovered, that 18-year repeating pattern, is accurate to within hours. Modern astronomers use computer models, satellite data, centuries of recorded observations. The Babylonians used clay tablets and human eyes. No telescopes, no computers, no satellites. Just systematic record-keeping and an understanding of celestial mechanics that required tracking movements across multiple lifetimes, passing knowledge down through generations of trained specialists. The tablets describe eclipses by time of night, direction of shadow movement, speed of obscuration and clearing, precise date in their lunar calendar. That level of specificity doesn't come from casual observation. It requires institutional knowledge, specialists trained from childhood, techniques passed down like sacred texts. A society that valued this information enough to dedicate enormous resources to collecting it. Why were they so obsessed with predicting disasters? Here's the untold part. NASA's archaeoastronomy research reveals something the tablets themselves don't mention. When Babylonian astronomers predicted an eclipse that threatened the king's life, They performed a ritual called the substitute king ceremony. They'd appoint a temporary ruler, usually a prisoner or commoner. During the eclipse period, this substitute would wear the crown, sit on the throne, bear the full weight of the omen. The real king would hide. If disaster struck, the substitute died. The king survived. Then they'd declare the omen satisfied. Clever? Absolutely. Horrifying? Without question. But here's what nobody talks about. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the substitute died under mysterious circumstances. Assassination, sudden illness, convenient accidents. The omens were fulfilled. The pattern continued. The priest's authority remained intact. Which raises a question nobody wants to ask out loud. Were these predictions or instructions? Follow the money. Follow the power. The Sumerian king list, another ancient document, claims kingship descended from the heavens. It lists rulers who reigned for thousands of years before a great flood. The list is meticulous, obsessively detailed. Specific kings with specific reign lengths in specific cities. Alulim of Eridu, 28,800 years. Aluljar, 36,000 years. 8 kings total. Combined reign, 241,200 years. Then the flood. Then kingship descended from heaven again. And that's not all. The list transitions to historical kings with normal human lifespans, rulers archaeologists have verified, whose palaces have been excavated, whose seals and inscriptions we've found. But the document presents both the mythical pre-flood kings and the historical post-flood kings in identical format. Same structure, same documentary style, same bureaucratic precision, as if they were all equally real. As if someone was recording actual events across an impossible timeline. The Eridu Genesis, another Sumerian tablet, describes this flood in detail. It explains that humanity was created to serve the gods, that the gods grew tired of human noise and chaos and decided to wipe them out, that one man, Ziusudra, was warned in advance and built a boat to survive. The biblical flood narrative appears thousands of years later, as the Sumerian version is older, much older. And here's what the reports omitted. The Eridu Genesis explicitly states that knowledge was preserved. Sacred texts and wisdom were hidden before the flood and recovered after. Astronomical knowledge, medical techniques, agricultural methods, metallurgy, writing itself. The tablets suggest this knowledge came from beings called the Anunnaki, a word that translates to those who from heaven to earth came. In Mesopotamian mythology, they're described as judges, as gods, as the offspring of the sky god An and the earth goddess Ki. They appear in texts spanning millennia, always presented not as metaphors, but as actual beings who walked among humans and ruled over them. Plot twist. March 2025. Dr. Jana Matushak publishes her analysis of Tablet Ni, 12,501 in the journal Iraq. That same tablet Kramer photographed and never published. The tablet tells a story scholars have never seen before. A myth about the storm god Ishkur being captured in the netherworld, Kur, dragged underground along with his cattle. While Ishkur's trapped below, children are born and die immediately. Drought spreads, starvation, chaos. His father, Enlil, described as the absolute head of the Sumerian pantheon, the one with authority over all other gods, gathers the Anunnaki to ask who will rescue Ishkur. None volunteer except Fox, who tricks his way into the underworld. The tablet breaks off before we learn if Fox succeeds. But Matuzak identifies something crucial. This is an example of the dying and reappearing god motif that appears throughout Mesopotamian literature. Gods who control vital forces, rain, grain, fertility, get captured or killed, and reality itself breaks down until a hero intervenes and rescues them. What if these weren't myths? What if they were memories, encoded accounts of real events, catastrophic climate disruptions caused by something ancient peoples couldn't explain except through metaphor, something that required specific intervention to fix? The tablets describe detailed rituals to annul bad omens. Not prayers, not sacrifices, rituals. Precise procedures involving specific materials, exact timing, particular words spoken in sequence. As if they were following an instruction manual. As if someone had given them a playbook for counteracting cosmic forces. Zecharia Sitchin enters the conversation here. He always does when ancient Mesopotamian texts get discussed. Sitchin was a self-taught scholar. He claimed expertise in Akkadian, though not Sumerian despite what his book covers implied, who published works claiming the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings from a planet called Nibiru. He pointed to cylinder seal 5A243, a Sumerian artifact showing a star surrounded by dots, and declared it depicted our solar system, including planets modern science didn't discover until recently. Scholars destroyed his translations. Linguists proved he misread basic cuneiform, mistranslated elementary grammar, invented meanings for words that had established definitions. Dr. Michael Heiser, a legitimate Semitic languages scholar, called Sitchin's work a complete fraud. And he was probably right. Sitchin's translations were sloppy at best, fabricated at worst. But here's what nobody addresses. Why did Sitchin's books sell millions of copies worldwide? Why do these ideas persist, spread, evolve, despite relentless academic debunking? Maybe because the official explanations don't satisfy the evidence. The Babylonians were superstitious, doesn't explain 18-year eclipse prediction cycles accurate to within hours. They got lucky with their guesses, doesn't explain systematic verification procedures using multiple forms of divination. It's just mythology, ancient fiction, doesn't explain why their flood account predates the biblical version by millennia and contains specific details that match. The academic establishment says Sitchin was wrong. He probably was. But that doesn't mean the tablets aren't hiding something we haven't understood yet. George and Taniguchi's paper focuses on linguistic translation. It's brilliant work, the kind of meticulous scholarship that requires years of training, decades of experience with ancient languages. But it doesn't address the obvious question hanging in the air like smoke you can't quite see but definitely smell. How did 4,000-year-old astronomers develop prediction systems that actually worked? The paper suggests most omens were probably linked to eclipse events through a purely theoretical or speculative system. But then it admits in the next paragraph, the origins of some of the omens may have lain in actual experience. Theory or experience, speculation or observation, see the problem? If it's experience, if these predictions actually corresponded to real disasters with enough consistency to justify the elaborate verification rituals, then we're talking about pattern recognition across centuries. A civilization-level project spanning generations, dedicated to understanding and predicting catastrophe. Why? What were they so afraid of? The tablets themselves hint at the answer. Those who advised the king kept watch on the night sky and would match their observations with the academic corpus of celestial omen texts. An academic corpus, a body of scholarly literature, passed down, preserved, continuously updated with new observation counts and correlations. This wasn't superstition, this was science. Primitive science, absolutely. Science mixed with ritual and religion and political power without question. But science nonetheless. Systematic observation, careful documentation, testable predictions, verification procedures. And the results scared them enough to appoint substitute kings to die in their place, rather than risk the actual ruler's life. The British Museum houses over 30,000 cuneiform tablets just from Ashurbanipal's library, one collection from one ancient ruler. Thousands more tablets sit in museums worldwide. The University of Pennsylvania, the Louvre, the Istanbul Archaeological Museums, private collections scattered across continents. Most haven't been fully translated. Most have never been analyzed beyond basic cataloging. In 2024, researchers finally decoded 4 eclipse tablets after 110 years of sitting in storage. In 2025, a previously ignored myth tablet gets proper scholarly attention because one researcher decided to revisit Kramer's old photographs. AI-assisted translation tools are now being developed specifically for cuneiform machine learning algorithms trained to recognize wedge patterns and suggest possible readings. What else is waiting? What other tablets have been photographed, cataloged, stored in climate-controlled rooms, and then forgotten because they're damaged, difficult to read, or possibly too disturbing to analyze? Dr. Matuzak noted that NI 12501 was largely ignored by generations of researchers, despite being featured on the dust cover of Kramer's 1956 book. Photographed, published, sitting in plain sight for 70 years, while scholars focused on other texts deemed more important or less fragmentary. After the 4 eclipse tablets came from Sippar, a single Babylonian city. How many other cities kept similar records? How many other prediction systems did they develop that we haven't discovered yet? And here's the question that should keep us awake at night. If they predicted eclipses and their associated disasters, what else did they predict? What else did they see coming? August 2024. 4 tablets fully translated after 110 years. Predictions written 4,000 years ago by astronomers who watched the sky with an intensity that bordered on religious obsession. Pestilence, drought, cattle deaths, locust swarms, the fall of kings, the destruction of empires. Now look at what's happened in the last 5 years. Look at it clearly. 2020, global pandemic. 2021 to 2022, supply chain collapse, political instability across every continent. 2022 to 2024, unprecedented locust swarms in East Africa and the Middle East. The worst infestations in recorded history. 2020 verse 23 to 2024, severe droughts across multiple continents simultaneously. 2024, cattle disease outbreaks in North America reaching crisis levels. 2024 to 2025, political upheaval, transitions of power, violent conflicts erupting in regions that still bear ancient Mesopotamian names. The tablets didn't just predict eclipses, they predicted what follows eclipses. The disasters that arrive in the wake of celestial events. And according to the Babylonian system, according to their 18-year Saros cycle that's been ticking forward like clockwork for 4,000 years. We're in the window right now. The April 8th, 2024 eclipse was visible across major population centers. Mexico City, Dallas, Indianapolis, Montreal. Millions of people watched the sky go dark. The next major eclipse visible from Earth? August 12th, 2026. Less than 2 years away. The cycle continues. The pattern marches forward. The Babylonians knew what happened during these cycles. They documented it with obsessive precision. They developed elaborate rituals to counteract the omens, to appease whatever forces they believed controlled these patterns. They took their predictions seriously enough to kill substitutes, to sacrifice human lives in the hope of averting worse disasters. We've decoded their warnings. We've read their predictions. We've published the translations in peer-reviewed journals. and then we've done nothing. We haven't followed their playbook. We haven't performed the rituals. Not that we necessarily should. But we haven't even studied whether there's any practical wisdom buried in those procedures. We've treated these tablets as historical curiosities, fascinating artifacts from a superstitious civilization that happened to stumble onto some accurate astronomical observations. But what if that's not the right way to read them? It's not that anyone actively suppressed this information. That's not quite accurate. It's that for 110 years, the tablets sat in plain sight and nobody bothered to finish translating them. It's that academic institutions have thousands of undecoded cuneiform texts and limited funding for ancient language specialists. It's that when someone does finish a translation, and it gets published in the Journal of Cuneiform Studies, a scholarly journal most people have never heard of, and gets maybe one news cycle before everyone moves on to the next headline. But now you know. You know that 4,000-year-old astronomers created systematic prediction models that correlated celestial events with earthly disasters. You know their predictions had enough validity that kings performed elaborate rituals, including appointing substitutes to die in their place, to avoid the predicted outcomes. You know these tablets were written in the same region that gave us the oldest flood narrative, the oldest creation myths, the oldest astronomical records humanity possesses. You know most of these tablets remain untranslated, sitting in museum collections worldwide, waiting for someone to have time and funding to read them. And you know, because you can verify this yourself, that we're currently living through an eclipse cycle, and the patterns described in those ancient tablets are playing out in real time around us. The Sumerian tablets said this would happen. And now it is. Check for yourself. Go look at the data, the eclipse dates, the disaster timelines, the correlation between celestial events and what follows. The patterns are there if you're willing to see them. So here's the real question. What else did they write that we haven't read yet? What other predictions are sitting in storage rooms in London, Chicago, Baghdad, Berlin, waiting for someone to translate them? What else are they trying to tell us? The next time you hear about a newly translated ancient tablet, pay attention. These aren't just historical curiosities, aren't just artifacts from a dead civilization with quaint supernatural beliefs. They're warnings from people who watched the sky obsessively, documented everything, developed prediction systems sophisticated enough to terrify them into performing human sacrifice rituals to avoid the forecasted outcomes. They took their predictions seriously enough to kill for them, seriously enough to die for them. Maybe we should take them seriously enough to listen. The tablets are still there. In London, in Chicago, in Baghdad, in Berlin, in Istanbul, in private collections we don't even know about, waiting to be read, waiting to reveal whatever else they predicted, whatever else they saw coming. What else are they trying to tell us? And what happens if we ignore them?